welcome back to my channel, everyone. In this video, today we will be reading Soiled Doves, Prostitution in the Early West by Anne Seagraves. Today we are on to Chapter 8, Chinese Slave Girls, Life Without Hope. Content disclaimer. This is going to be an extremely serious, dark, and sorrowful topic. I will be reading about children being forced into prostitution. If you are sensitive to just anything, you just take yourself into consideration before viewing the rest of this content. Thank you. And with that, we will be getting started. This isn't an easy topic to touch on. So, first we'll be looking at an image courtesy of the California State Library, Sacramento, California. This is a quote by Herbert Osprey. "The only entrance to the crib was a narrow door, in which was set a small barred window. Occupants of the den took turns standing behind the bars and striving to attract the attention of passing men. When an interested male stopped before the crib, the harlot displayed the upper part of her body and cajoled him with seductive cries and motions." The Barbary Coast by Herbert Osprey. And here is a person behind a cage. Alright, so let's get into Chapter 8, The Chinese Slave Girls, A Life Without Hope. Although Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves in 1863, an even more corrupt form of slavery continued to exist in America for another 47 years. White slavery. In this sordid business, innocent victims ranging from 12 to 19 years in age were forced into the living hell of prostitution. This vicious bondage upon women lasted until 1910, when the Mann Act was passed by Congress prohibiting the interstate transportation of women for immoral purposes. The fact of the Chinese slave girls, however, was particularly distressing. These girls were bought for pennies in China and imported to California to be sold to the highest bidder. The Mann Act unfortunately did not help them, as the Chinese slave trade lasted into the late 1920s. Many of these frightened girls attempted to flee, but there was no place they could hide and no escape until 1895, when the Donaldina Cameron began her crusade on behalf of the little prisoners. Quote, "All of the slave girls in San Francisco, particularly those who occupied the cribs, were shamefully mistreated by their masters. They received no part of their earnings, and most of them never left their dens except for brief periods. For failure to please every man who visited them, they were lashed with whips and branded with hot irons." End quote. The Chinese girl was considered of little value, even in her own country, for it was her parents who sold her into slavery. She was merely a piece of merchandise to be auctioned to the highest bidder. The girl had no control over her moral or physical condition. A caged animal received more kindness and freedom. Ironically, a Chinese woman named Ah Toy, I'm not sure on my pronunciation, I do apologize if that's not accurate. A Chinese woman named Ah Toy was among the first to procure girls from her own country for California's lucrative slave trade. Ah Toy arrived in San Francisco about 1849, aboard a China clipper. I don't know what that is. I will put information here about what a China clipper is. Her husband died a few weeks out to sea, and the beautiful woman became the captain's mistress. When she left the clipper, Ah Toy's pockets were filled with gold, and she was wearing the finest silks. The captain had been a generous man. As the attractive woman strolled toward the embarcadero, she noticed the attention she was receiving from an excited group of male followers. In China, a woman was considered, quote, a worthless female, end quote. In San Francisco, however, it appeared the sight of a woman, especially of Asian origin, drove the men wild. Atoy modestly bowed her head, but her shrewd mind was filled with thoughts of money. If American men became this aroused over the glimpse of a Chinese woman, they would surely pay for the privilege of a closer look. Although Atoy had shared her favors with the captain, she was not, at that time, a prostitute, merely a satisfactory mistress. Consequently, she decided to open a look but don't touch show, and charged as much as the men would pay. Atoy rented a 2-room building, added a platform in one room, and cut round peepholes in the walls. She hired a strong Chinese man to collect 1 ounce of gold from each eager customer who was willing to pay for a look. Needless to say, Atoy was a great success. When all the peepholes were occupied, she would appear upon the small stage wearing a form-fitting embroidered silk kimono with a split on both sides from hem to waist. Underneath, Atoy was totally nude. With each movement of her shapely body, the female starved men became a little wilder. Soon they were a foot-stomping, howling mass of humanity. The show lasted only a few minutes, but Atoy seemed to be on her way to wealth. Her admirers stood wearing lines over a block long. Atoy's fortune, however, was not to come from the peep show. Her customers began paying with brass nuggets, and the Chinese man couldn't tell the real gold from the phony. Atoy tried taking the men who cheated her to court, but her case was dismissed. She left her show behind and became the mistress of many men of wealth and prominence. Atoy, with her help, went on to become one of the principal and most promiscuous dealers in Chinese prostitution. She opened a chain of brothels and cribs throughout California and was known as San Francisco's first Asian madame. I don't think it's okay to say the O word anymore, so I'm skipping the O word and putting Asian if you couldn't tell. Atoy imported her own girls from China, where she selected choice females for a very low price. This clever, unscrupulous woman took the inexperienced girls, as many as young as 11, and turned them over to the captain and his crew for training. When they arrived in San Francisco, the girls were already knowledgeable in prostitutes. They knew the value of a coin and could tell real gold from brass. The girls had learned to say, "pay first," and wore rice powder and rouge upon their once innocent faces. From 1850 through the turn of the century, thousands of Chinese slaves were brought to America. The majority of the prosecutors were Asians seeking a way to make a fat profit. These greedy flesh peddlers purchased pretty young girls to fill special orders for pompous merchants, wealthy miners, and to sell at private auctions. Many of these children were shipped to San Francisco in large padded crates like animals. They did not understand English and had no idea where they were going or what awaited them at the end of a long voyage. Others were sold to paper husbands or parents and brought to America under the pretense of being a wife or daughter. Since small girls in China often married older men, they had no problem with immigration office officials. Unfortunately, some Americans willingly looked the other way for a bribe or donation. A few of the older, more beautiful girls were enticed to come to America with the promise of a rich husband or an education, only to be sold into the houses of prostitution. When the girls first arrived, they were herded into an immense underground cavern known as the Queen's Room. For the next few weeks, they were under the care of the older Chinese women who had survived the ordeal of prostitution. These women taught the girls ways to please men and how to enrich them into their cubicles. They learned to say, quote, "China girl, very nice. You come inside, please, and I make you happy," end quote. Harsh words for little girls to utter. After the girls were rested and ready for inspection, the buyers were notified of the auction. When the sale began, the girls were brought in one by one to the block. They were stripped, punched, and prodded, in some cases examined by Chinese physicians, a price having been agreed upon for a given girl. The amount in gold or currency was placed in her outstretched palm. She immediately handed it to the man who had offered her for sale. Quote, the line is, the girl had been sold. In order to make the sale legal, the girl was forced to sign a contract that usually said, "For the consideration of blank, paid into my hands on this day, I, blank, promise to prostitute my body for the term of blank years. If in that time I am sick one day, 2 weeks shall be added to my time. And if more than one, my term of prostitution shall be continued an additional month. But if I run away or escape from the courtesy of my keepers, then I am to be held as a slave for life. Signed, blank." That is awful. This document was binding. During the female's monthly cycle, she would automatically be ill for more than one day unless she was pregnant. Since she was incapacitated at this time, at least 1 month, therefore, was added to every month of service under the term of the contract. The Chinese girl was caught on a treadmill, which she could never leave, doomed to work until she died of disease or became too old for the profession. She never received money. The procurator took it from her palm. Since the Chinese girl could not read or write, she signed the contract with her mark, not knowing what was written. These girls were valuable property. In 1815, they were sold for a few $100s apiece. As their popularity increased, the amount went even higher. During the 1890s, female babies as young as 1 year began arriving from China to be sold for $100 each. There seemed to be no end to the abuse. What hope could there be for an infant who was trained to be a prostitute before her teens? Following the auction, the girls were placed in either a brothel or a crib. The brothel prostitutes were painted and powdered, sprayed with seductive perfume, and dressed in the finest silks. They served the customers drinks and had to entertain any man who requested their services, in whatever manner he chose. The Asian girls were very clean. They shaved their bodies daily and took frequent baths, although 90% of them eventually contracted a disease, it was not for lack of cleanliness. Often a girl with special beauty or charm would attract a wealthy client who purchased her for his own executive use. When he tired of her, she went back to the brothel or became an independent prostitute. On a few occasions, the man would fall in love with the girl and make her his wife. This, however, was rare. The girls who were sold to the crib owners had an entirely different life. They were sent to work in the rat-infested section of Chinatown and operated out of two small, shabby rooms divided by heavy drapes. In these cramped quarters, as many as 6 girls plied their trade. They wore embroidered silk blouses with nothing below. These girls were forced to service the lowliest men in the most debased ways imaginable. The average crib girl lasted 6 years. She was called a sing-song girl because she had to stand in the doorway of a sordid crib and advertise her charms. Her plaintive voice could be heard throughout the night crying, quote, "Two bitty looky flow, bitty feely 6 bitty doughy," end quote. Many of these girls became wild-eyed creatures who were so full of fear and hatred that they would strike out at anyone. In order to calm a girl, her keeper would chain her to the bed and administer narcotics. Quote, 6 years was a long time for a girl to live after being placed in a crib, and since she almost inevitably began her life of misery and degradation in her early teens, a Chinese prostitute of more than 20 years was a great rarity. Moreover, she was by that time nothing more than a frightful old hag, end quote. When she was of no further use as a prostitute, the girl was placed in a small cell where she had the choice of taking her own life or being murdered. By 1870, there were several thousand Chinese women and girls in San Francisco. Less than 100 were respected members of the community. All Chinese, both male and female, were called, I'm not going to say that out loud. I'm just going to just say it was unkind words, because they maintained the customs of their native land. The men wore braided, I'm not sure what this is, braided cuirassiers and silk slippers. They were notorious for their opium dens and the little slave girls, which were kept carefully locked behind closed doors. Quote, because of the prejudice of the times, the Chinese girls were not real people to the white community. What happened to them was of no real concern. In its lusty frontier character alive into the 20th century, San Francisco took pride in its sinfulness. In 1873, the church women began to get involved in Chinatown's vice when they organized the Asian Board. A Presbyterian mission was built at 920 Sacramento Street with volunteer rescue workers. In 1895, at the age of 25, a remarkable woman named Donaldina Cameron joined the mission. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that name. Donaldina, or Donaldina? I'm gonna go with Donaldina. Cameron joined the mission. It was a decision that would change both her life and that of the Chinese girls. Within a short time, Donaldina, who had no previous experience in social work, was running the mission. She and her workers did not wait for the girls to send for help. They went into the alleys and streets to find them. It was more than a crusade for these women. It was a battle against organized prostitution and the freeing of innocent victims. Donaldina was a lovely, young, New Zealand-born Scotch woman with clear blue eyes and a tall, slender build. She was soft-spoken and wore her long, slightly gray hair in a pompadour. Underneath her gentle bearing, however, was a courageous woman who did not know the meaning of the word fear when it came to saving the girls. She soon knew every twisted alley in Chinatown. Donaldina learned who the underground people were, and with the help of the laws and sympathetic Chinese, she was almost always successful in her raids upon the Asian houses of prostitution. Once she was given a clue, Donaldina was off at full speed to run it down. She never gave up. This exceptional woman was known by two nicknames. She was called, quote, Lomo, meaning beloved mother, by the girls who wanted to show the affection they felt for her. On the other hand, the slave dealers in underground called her Fan Q, or the White Devil, a woman they both feared and despised. These unscrupulous flesh peddlers told the already abused girls that Donaldina was a she-devil who would drink their blood and show them no mercy. But as word of her daring raids spread throughout every miserable brothel and crib in Chinatown, the girls realized that Donaldina was their friend. Although Lomo was a slender woman, she would chop down doors with an axe and tear away the wood with her own hands to rescue a girl. On the occasion, a hunt ended when Donaldina pulled a trap door up and found a girl hidden in a square box between the floor and a false ceiling below. Most of the time, the police assisted in these raids, which often led to chases over the rooftops, down the twisted alleys, and into rat-infested basements. The result being that Lomo again rescued yet another prisoner. It was a sordid world of muffled screams, opium fumes, and squalor. The girls themselves eventually began smuggling messages to the mission home through a kind customer. When the rescue took place, the girls would pretend to fight Donaldina in fear. If the raid failed, the girl knew she would be sent to a mining camp where she would be at the mercy of hundreds of lonely men. Donaldina, however, seldom failed. All of the girls suffered from years of pain and brutality. They had to learn that kindness still existed. And Donaldina, with her faith, strength, and love, devoted her life helping the former slaves find a life of dignity. She saw that they received an education and learned responsibility. Many of the girls who once had no future entered into matrimony. When this happened, the young man always came to Lomo to ask for the girl's hand in marriage. She usually said yes, as well as planned the wedding. The mission had become a place where no girl was turned away, for they were all Donaldina's children. Sorry. In 1928, Yokina, who was rescued by Donaldina, became one of the first Chinese women to graduate from Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. When Yoke Keen completed her education, she returned to her native land to help educate her people. Other formal slave girls followed Keene, all hoped to better the situation of the burdened women of China. They planned to dedicate their lives as Donatella had, preventing little girls from being sold for pennies to live a life of slavery. In 1939, at the age of 70, Donatella left the mission. She had spent more than 40 years fighting against slavery and prejudice in the Chinese community. It was time for a rest. The beloved Lomo retired to a cottage in Palo Alto, where she lived with her two sisters, surrounded by numerous friends, and with her adopted children. After her sisters passed away, Miss Tian Wu, a former slave and associate, lived with her. On January 4th, 1968, 1 month before her 99th birthday, Donaldina Cameron died of complications from her hip surgery. During her eventful life, Donaldina's girls had become her foster children. A few were adopted, and all were called her daughters. Lo Mo and her dedicated helpers had been credited with the rescue of more than 3,000 Chinese girls. Their courage and commitment to social reform in San Francisco will always be admired and remembered. And then we have a snippet of San Francisco Chronicle, December 5th, 1869. The place is loathsome in the extreme. On one side is a shelf 4 feet wide and about a yard above the dirty floor, upon which there are 2 old rice mats. There is not the first suggestion of furniture in the room, no table, no chairs or stools, nor any windows. When any of the unfortunate harlots is no longer useful, and a Chinese physician passes his opinion that her disease is incurable, she is notified that she must die. Led by the knight to this hole of a hospital, she is forced within the door and made to lie down upon the shelf. A cup of water, another of boiled rice, and a little metal oil lamp are placed by her side. Those who have immediate charge of the establishment know how long the oil should last, and when the limit is reached, they return to the hospital, unbar the door, and enter. Generally, the woman is dead, either by starvation or from her own hands. But sometimes life is not extinct. The spark remains when the doctors enter, yet this makes little difference to them. They come for a corpse, and they never go away without it. And then this is on opium dens, this next bit. Opium is a powerful narcotic made from a form of poppy grown in Asia. When properly used, it is a valuable medicine. In the hands of the wrong people, however, opium becomes a health hazard that causes addiction and leads to a loss of moral values. During the 1800s, Chinese opium dens could be found throughout the West. Men and women frequented them in order to gain a feeling of euphoria and well-being. Most of the customers were entirely dependent upon using the drug and visited these illegal dens of vice on a regular basis. The opium den usually consisted of tiny, unventilated cubicles opening off a main hall. Each room had a cot and tables upon which the smoke supplies were laid. The customer placed a prepared pill over a tiny opening in the pipe. They reclined upon one hip on the cot and inhaled the smoke. When they drifted off into a rose-colored dream, the pipe was placed on the table because the drug often caused nausea. A customer who became ill could lean over the cot and use the bowl placed beneath. It has been said that the term hippie started in the opium dens, since the customers always leaned upon one hip. They became known as hippies. I did not know that that's where the term came from. It's interesting. All right, next we have some photos. We have courtesy of San Francisco Library, San Francisco, California. Squalid Chinese cribs in San Francisco's old Chinatown. And then we have this next photo, but this is the crib. And then next we have Library of Congress. This photograph was donated by the prosecutors of Nobody's Girl, a docudrama portrayed the lives of minority and subculture women in America west of 1850 to 1890. It will appear on public television in the fall of 1994. The Chinese slave girl modestly bows her head as she crosses the street in San Francisco's old Chinatown. This is circa 1855, and there's a woman, or a girl, here. Then we have Donatella Cameron and 3 of the Chinese girls she rescued from slavery. We have her here. And this is from courtesy of the San Francisco Library, San Francisco, California. Now we have a little bit on Donatella, and then that's the end of chapter 8. A little white-haired woman whose gentleness is only equaled by her courage for 37 years was known as Fan Qua, the White Devil of Chinatown, feared like the plague by its evil doers. But today she bears another name, Lomo, Love Mother. She is Donatella Cameron, head of the Presbyterian Rescue Mission at 920 Sacramento Street. Under her care, the quiet old mission housed 3,000 Chinese girls, braving every peril without thought for her own safety. Miss Cameron invaded the slave marts and the secret hiding places of the traders in human lives whenever word came to her that some helpless girl slave was being held. More than once she was forced to battle with her own hands as she beat off the slave traders attempting to wrest rescued girls from her protection. But those days of thrilling rescues are largely a thing of the past, says Miss Cameron. Though there's still some slavery and cause for eternal vengeance on the part of the authorities and mission rescue workers. And so Fan Q, the White Devil, has become instead Lomo, beloved mother to the whole community, even as she is to the girls she has sheltered and to their children, for most of them are married comfortably and have families of their own. Miss Cameron began her work as a fearless, high-hearted girl of 20 in the old days before the fire, quote unquote. The modern Chinese community is a model compared with the hellhole of the old days, but even yet there is a need in Chinatown as in other parts of the city, for protection for girls alone in a strange land. Just last week, Miss Cameron added 2 girls to her family at the mission. One was taken out of actual slavery, and the other, highly educated in Chinese, but utterly ignorant in the language and ways of America, was rescued just in time after she had been brought to San Francisco. That is the San Francisco Chronicle, Monday, October 17th, 1932. That is the end of chapter 8. The next, and I believe last chapter, is chapter 9, Colorful Ladies of the Southwest. We will be ending our reading there for today. Oh, wow. Chapter 8 was immensely intense. That is a hard thing to read about, to think about. Reading the tragedies of the past, although grim, is just so vital in knowing just what our country is built on, what sacrifices have been made, what tragedies have happened, and just how people have overcome such a hellish vile. I got all teary-eyed. I can't help it. That is a horrific thing to just read. Although it is a very hard video, I do hope that you were able to find the reading at least, I guess, interesting. I don't even want to say I hope you enjoyed it, because I didn't really enjoy it myself, except the ending. Hearing many were rescued was very nice to hear. Yeah, I'm a bit emotional today, so I think I ought to stop it here. Have a good day. Be kind in the world. Bye.